Gee, that was great, Dad, but how about all the other stories about the rat tail soup and the night you saw the ghost?
About the rat tail soup.
Well, I have a very unusual but interesting story to tell about the rat tail soup. When we were stationed either in Rosyth, Scotland, or in Scapa Flow on our base, I was on the quarterdeck one day at noon. The boatswain's mate had piped down for the noon meal, and I saw a sailor coming to the top deck with a bowl of soup and a tail hanging out over the edge of the bowl. And I became somewhat curious, so I went over to examine it more thoroughly, and here I found it was the tail of a rat. And all of the boys at my table had piped down and were beginning to eat, and everybody loved bean soup. And this was bean soup with the rat tail in it, of course. So I went down to the mess table, and I said, "Boys, you know what you're eating?" Big Harry Fowle from Texas said, "What are we eating?" I said, "Rat tail soup." Harry said, "Give me your bowls, boy, give me your bowls." He was very fond of bean soup. And I said, "No kidding, you better examine it." I said, "You're eating rat tail soup, rat soup." And so some of the boys began to examine their bowls, and they found not only part of the rat's tail, but also little bits of fur. And then even Harry, the fellow who loved bean soup so well, it turned him against it. He didn't want any more. And from that time on, no one, in our division especially, in our section, had a love for bean soup. The result of it was that the cooks were derated, many of them, for this, because they were supposed to put these beans in a big urn and rinse them before they cooked them. And apparently they took the bags and dumped them right into the big urns, and the old rat was in there, and he got cooked along with the beans. End of the story. When I was in training in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, we received shore leave quite often, and I had a girlfriend in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
You mean not Grandma?
That's right.
Has one in every port.
Another girlfriend.
Has one in every port.
And I had two sailors who were good friends of mine, and they each had girlfriends, so they decided one Sunday night they would take us to church. And so we went to church, and of course I had always been taught to behave in church if nowhere else. And these two friends of mine, they were cutting up quite a bit, and of course we didn't think anything of it. So the next day in the training station, we were going for mess at 12 o'clock, and the master-at-arms pulled us out of line and said, you have been reported, he said, for your actions last night. We said, "What for?" And we didn't know, of course, that the master-at-arms was a church as well as ourselves. And he said, "You're on report for skylarking in church, and you must appear at Mass, as they call it, this afternoon at 1 o'clock. So the three of us were pretty well scared at that time, and we appeared before the commanding officer of the training station. I think he was a lieutenant commander, and the master-at-arms prepared the charges against us, skylarking in church, and then asked each of us what we had to say for ourselves. And so we each gave our story, and the master-at-arms, after hearing our story...
What'd you say?
Well, I told him, I said, I wasn't skylarking. I said, my friends might have been. I said, I might have been laughing at what they were doing, but I wasn't skylarking in church.
You know what skylarking is?
And I told the commanding officer this, but the chief master-at-arms refuted our statement and said they were skylarking in church, all three of them, and the commanding officer said, "You know, it's a very serious charge." He said, "I could give you boys a summary court-martial," and about that time my knees began to shake, and I thought I was going to go to the floor, and he said, "But instead of giving you a summary court-martial, he said, I'll give you 10 days bread and water." And he said, "While you're in the brig," he said, "think this over. It's a very serious charge." He said, "Master-at-arms, do you have a waiting list?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Put these in the fellows in the brig first." And so they put us on an old prison ship, the USS Southerly. And unfortunately, I was the least guilty of the gang, at least I thought I was, and I got the worst cell. I had a cell with a mast going up through it. A door just had holes big enough to get a cigarette through, and no light at all. and those fellows had cells with portholes in them. And I never put any longer 10 days in anywhere in my life. I thought it was about 10 weeks. But while we were in this prison ship, the boys in our section came down there for rowing practice to the river, and Bigler, who was one of my tent mates, we were in a tent at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, he called to Ward Heath, who had one of the cells had a porthole, and said, "Tell Les we're leaving tomorrow." And they went aboard, I think it was the Oklahoma, I believe it was, at that time. And then Ward and I, we were released from the brig after 10 days. And while we were in there, we only got we were fed on bread and water every meal, except every third day we got full rations. So we come out of the brig, and we weren't out only one day. Ward says, "What do you go? We go and ask the commanding officer for shore leave." I says, "Okay." So I went to the commanding officer and saluted him and said, "Sir, may we go to shore this evening?" And he said to us, "You fellows just come out of the brig, didn't you?" We said, "Yep." He said, "Not tonight." And Ward says, "What do you say we jump ship?" I said, "Now listen, fella," I said, "you better not do that," I said, "because you'll get a summary court-martial." So I had to talk him out of it. Consequently, we were the only ones left there in our division. And then we left, of course, about a month afterward to go aboard to Florida.
Now, when you decided to become a minister, when you were meditating for 10 days...
I thought I'd better.